A lot of times I hear from most of the times Americans, but now also people are using Japan and that China owes them because they were doing business with them. And this is your favorite half Chinese. So in their mind, the people are saying China is now so developed and that is because of us. Not because they were working hard, not because they were the ones who putting in the infrastructure, who reinvested the money, who brought up the bottom of the people up to the middle class, not those. No, it is the West and even Japan that has to take the credit for China's development. If that would be the case, then I don't understand how is it that the United States is not that developed? And how is it that Japan is crumbling right now as we speak? It doesn't make any sense to make these kind of things, accusations or these kind of statements, I should say. Because when you are making a trade deal, it goes both ways. It is not going one way. There was no free lunch for China. And let us just dig a little bit into the history of it to make this case. So they're talking about the time right after the economic Cold War on China that they were waging on China to destroy the economy of China, to make Chinese people's lives miserable. Why? Just because they did not want China to be a communist state. Just because China said, you are welcome to the business, because even this gentleman here, Mr. Mao, even him was sending letters to all the American presidents, but almost none were returned. Why? Simply because they are choosing their own path and they did not want their people to be exploited. They did not want their country to be exploited by a handful of capitalists that is exploiting the majority of the world. They said, no, you're welcome to do business, but it comes with terms and conditions which will be favorable to our people. And that does not mean necessarily that it will be unfavorable to your people, because it was extremely favorable to your people. And this is when I speak directly to the people who still have that mindset, because when China was making all these stuffs, they were working for nickels and dimes. But in the United States, those same goodies were sold for hard dollars and not nickels and dimes. Who do you think that actually earned more on this corporation? Was it China or was it the other hand? It's always the other side, because most of the time factories don't have a huge profit margin. But also we cannot neglect that from 1949 all the way till 1963, the West and the Japan and all these others, I call them the usual suspects, were waging an economic war on a country that did nothing wrong to them, other than the biggest crime was, we want to take care of our people. We do not want our people to be exploited. We want them to thrive. That was the biggest crime. Therefore, China also said we cannot sell out our means of production. Cannot be privatized as it belongs to the people. That was a big crime, because that is not working for the capitalists. Now, I also want to reiterate that during World War II, China suffered immensely under the Japanese. So for the people who are claiming that China also owes Japan, when are you going to repay your debt of the suffering, taking the lives of 20 million people in China in the most harsh way? One of them was this, Chen Penhua, who was captured by the Japanese and was repeatedly SA'd and tortured, and before that they took the life of her just newlywed husband before taking hers. And you want to say that China owes Japan? Let's not forget how much Japan owes China, especially when it comes to cultural things. A big thing everybody heard about Zen. It is not Zen, it's Chan. It comes from China. It does not come from Japan. The blossom, the sushi, the matcha, the kimono, and the list goes on and on and on. It's all from China, and they reappropriate it to make it theirs. And nobody in the world is saying, oh, we owe these beautiful cultural things to China. But China has to be owing the world for just doing business, for allowing stinky factories to pollute their nation. That is what China needs to owe you for. Let's not forget the other part of history. 1839, China was 1/3 of the world's GDP. In 1901, it already has sunken to almost like, probably it was already number 11 poorest nation in the world. What was the reason? Well, first, we had the first Opium War in 1839, started because of a trade deficit. The English were buying a lot of tea from China and porcelain and other things, and the Chinese really didn't need many of the luxury goods coming from Europe or from England specifically. Because Chinese just don't use those kind of stuff back in those days. And because of that, the British thought maybe we should just run them over with opium, and so they did. And when those opium was confiscated because it was illegal in China, and many people don't know this, but it was already illegal since 1700 something. So when a shipload was captured by Lin Zexu, I believe it was 1.2 or 1.6 million tons. But take it, the number, I have to do it out of my head. So I could be a little bit off there. But that was about the quantity that they were running China over with all that opium. The most horrible thing of this was that the British knew how bad it was, because that was the reason for the British to ban it in their own country, because it would be devastating to the people and devastating to the state. But it was okay to send it to China. But China needs to owe the British because they later, in 2000 something, they had a trade deal? What? That was the first Opium War, the reason why. I need people to understand this. It was all because of a trade deal, or a trade deficit, I should say. And then you had the second one in 1860 somewhere with France. Because France thought, well, if we can get, land from the Chinese and money because they lose a war that we started on them, an unprovoked war of aggression, something that we are in the West so totally against when we talk it in the context of Russia and Ukraine. But we're never against it when we are doing it all over the globe. And this time, it was China's turn to get into a war, an unprovoked war of aggression. And then China lost more land, more money, became more poor, and was more extorted. Because after a war was lost, it was not that the West was talking about, oh, England and the France, they need to repay China for the damage that they've done. No, no, no. It was China who had to pay for all the damage because of them defending themselves. If we put it in the context of today with Russia and Ukraine, many people in the West are saying that Russia needs to pay because they started it. But who has to pay China then? Not to mention the looting of the Summer Palace, which was during the Second Opium War. All those artifacts are still in the museums in France and in England. Nobody says that England or France owes China for what they have now. But they were the ones who were robbing China. And then in 1901, you had the Eighth Alliance. And many other countries, Western countries, also joined just to start an unprovoked war of aggression, yet again. Just so they could rob more and extort China more. Because again, nobody in the West said, we started the war on them, an unprovoked war of aggression, so we have to pay damage to them for what we did to them, like we are talking about Russia and Ukraine right now. No, again, it was China who had to pay. This is how China was robbed blind until it was number 11 poorest nation in the world, coming from 1/3 of the world's GDP. After the 70s, well, first we had a revolution in China, and the Communist Party of China won. And the reason why they won was because the people were fighting. It wasn't a regular army. These were the actual, what fans will call peasants, that were fighting against a fascist state, a tyrant that was backed by the West and allowed exploitation. These were the real people. And anybody who loves democracy should now see that this is the highest form of democracy, the people taking their power back. But unfortunately for many, once you say the word communism, then everything will change. But why would it change if that is what the people want? That is their democratic and free choice. So in 1949, the People's Republic of China was founded. And the Communist Party of China was the ruling party out of 9. And instead of the West saying, well, these people gained their freedom, loosened themselves from all these imperialists that destroyed their nation, that flooded it with opium. No. It was nothing like that. The first thing they did was start an economic war on China. For no reason at all. China still had not done anything to the West whatsoever, or to the Japanese. In fact, they were the victim of their cruelties. The West was hoping that one day the Republic of China, or Chiang Kai-shek's tyrannical regime that fled to Taiwan and then forcefully occupied it with more than 3 decades martial law and tyranny. Yes, not democracy and freedom of speech, because if you even looked like a communist, your head would be separated from your body. Yes, and I said it, even looked like it. How can people look like a communist? Well, if you have a certain haircut, they will take your life. This is how it was. And all under protection of the West, hoping that they will one day be able to take back the mainland. Obviously, that didn't happen. Then you had the Korean War, where the United States started to drop boom booms on border cities of China. This is how China got involved. They didn't want to be in that war. They've refused, but once you are starting to attack their border towns, they have no more choice. And when they were pushing the Americans and their Western allies all the way back, they were threatened with an atomic bomb. Now you know why they have one. And it never happened after that anymore. But later, in the early 60s, even the West saw that the People's Republic of China is there to stay. And so, as usual, they shifted sides. They shifted sides to the People's Republic of China, and then Taiwan, or the Republic of China, which is its official name, was thrown out of the United Nations in 1971 through Resolution 2758. And the People's Republic of China became the sole legitimate owner of whole of China, and the only one who is being acknowledged as such. And why did they do that? Because they wanted to exploit the people in China. They wanted to have cheap goods to be produced in China because it was cheaper than in their own home. Yes, it was cheaper than in their own home. That means also, at the same time, they were earning more money on China than China earned on them. But a great example of this cooperation is the big supermarket chain in the United States. That was actually because of the cooperation between China and the United States. But also that wasn't a free lunch. So to say that China owes any of these people, when are they going to get back everything that was stolen from them? The difference between China and the West, or better said, the difference between China and capitalist states, is that the money that China made, those nickels and dimes, were reinvested back into the people. They built up the bottom line all the way up so they could go to school, they could have health care, and they could be taken care of. This is how China did it. They didn't look at the people at the top, what we do in a capitalist nation. They never did that. They were looking at the people at the bottom. Because if you want your country to flourish, you need to have those people to flourish first. If you want to have a consumer, you need to make sure that your consumer has the means to make money. The West stopped doing that because the West was a capitalist nation, and in the 80s we went full neoliberalism. So when the West went full neoliberalism, they also wanted to get rid of the manufacturing bases because they wanted to speculate. Because speculation gives more capital. And in a capitalist nation, it is only about capitalism. Only capital. So they went into financial markets instead of manufacturing. That is why we saw the rise in homes, because they were speculating on it. That is why all the means of production have been privatized and is now becoming too expensive to pay for. It's not China that owes any of us. In fact, after this whole history, we can also make a case that it is actually the West that owes China. We were the ones from the West that were robbing them. It wasn't the other way around. But yet, they need to be thankful to us. Anyway, I'll leave it at this. Let me know in the comment section what you all think of this. But please keep it respectful. We're not uncivilized barbarians, unlike some others. Please like, share, and if you have not yet, then follow. And as always, have a great day. Your favorite half Chinese.